The morning mist hung heavy over the Gulf Coast of Florida, where a seemingly ordinary fisherman spent his days at an old wooden dock. What the local cartel didn't know when they decided to mock this quiet Navy veteran was that they were taunting one of the deadliest snipers in U.S. military history. Their mistake would cost them everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The salt-laden breeze whispered through the weathered planks of Palmer's Dock, a modest fishing pier jutting out into the emerald waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Located in the small coastal town of Cedar Key, Florida, the dock had stood for generations, witnessing countless sunrises and the daily rituals of local fishermen. This morning was no different, as seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries mixing with the gentle lapping of waves against the barnacle-encrusted pilings. At the far end of the dock, Marcus Reynolds sat in his usual spot, a fishing rod held loosely in his weathered hands. His face, tanned and lined from years under the sun, betrayed little emotion as he watched his line disappear into the crystal-clear waters below. To the casual observer, he was just another local, one of many retirees who had chosen this quiet corner of Florida's coast to escape the chaos of city life. The small fishing community of Cedar Key barely registered on most maps, its population hovering just under 1,000 souls. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where gossip traveled faster than the fishing boats that dotted the horizon, and where strangers stood out like beacons in the night. The town's residents were a mix of old-time fishing families, retirees seeking peace, and a handful of tourists who had discovered this hidden gem and decided to stay. Marcus had chosen this spot carefully when he moved here 3 years ago. The dock offered clear sight lines in all directions, multiple escape routes, and a perfect vantage point to observe the comings and goings of boats in the channel. Old habits died hard, even after 15 years of civilian life. His routine was simple: arrive at dawn, fish until noon, then return home to his modest house on the outskirts of town. The locals knew him as the quiet veteran who kept to himself, always polite but never quite letting anyone get too close. What they didn't know, what nobody in Cedar Key knew, was that Marcus Reynolds had once been known by another name in the military: Ghost Eye. As a Navy SEAL sniper, he had recorded over 200 confirmed kills during his multiple deployments across the globe. His accuracy had become legendary within the special operations community, and his ability to remain completely invisible while eliminating high-value targets had earned him his nickname. The dock creaked beneath his feet as he adjusted his position, his movements deliberate and efficient despite his seemingly relaxed posture. His fishing gear, while functional, served another purpose entirely. The hollow rod handle concealed a high-frequency radio, and his tackle box housed enough firepower to hold off a small army. Years of operating in hostile territory had taught him never to be unprepared, even in a place as peaceful as Cedar Key. Recently, though, the peace had begun to show cracks. Small things at first, strange boats appearing in the channel at odd hours, new faces in town that didn't quite fit the tourist profile, and whispered conversations that stopped when locals walked by. Marcus had noticed it all, cataloguing each detail with the same precision that had once helped him track targets across war-torn countries. The signs were familiar to him. A cartel was establishing a presence in Cedar Key. The small town's location, with its maze of coastal waterways and minimal law enforcement presence, made it an ideal point for drug trafficking operations. Marcus had seen it before in other coastal communities: the subtle infiltration, the quiet takeover, and eventually the violence that always followed. Local law enforcement, consisting of just a handful of deputies led by Sheriff Sarah Martinez, was ill-equipped to handle what was coming. Marcus had watched them patrol the waters, their single aging boat no match for the high-powered vessels that now sliced through the channel under cover of darkness. He knew it was only a matter of time before the cartel's presence became more overt, more aggressive. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the dock, Marcus reeled in his line and checked his watch. In the distance, a sleek cigarette boat approached, its twin engines growling as it cut through the water. It was the third time this week he'd seen this particular vessel, its crew growing bolder with each pass. They were testing the waters, both literally and figuratively, seeing how much they could get away with before someone pushed back. Marcus began packing up his gear, his movements unhurried but purposeful. He knew what was coming, had known it since he first spotted the cartel's scouts in town. Soon they would make their move to establish full control over Cedar Key's waterways. When they did, they would discover that this quiet fishing community had a guardian they hadn't counted on, one who had spent his entire military career dealing with threats exactly like them. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Marcus's living room as he cleaned his fishing gear with methodical precision. His modest beach house, set back from the road and surrounded by dense sea grape bushes, offered both privacy and tactical advantage. Through the front windows, he had a clear view of the approach from town, while the back deck provided an unobstructed sightline to the water. Inside, the house was spartanly furnished, everything arranged with military efficiency. What visitors never saw was the reinforced walls, the bulletproof windows, or the hidden room beneath the floorboards where Marcus kept his real equipment. This wasn't just a house. It was a fortress disguised as a retiree's peaceful retreat. Marcus moved to his workshop, a converted garage that smelled of gun oil and salt air. Here, among his fishing rods and tackle boxes, lay the tools of his former trade, carefully maintained and ready for use. His fingers traced the familiar outline of his custom-built Macmillan TAC 338 sniper rifle, a weapon that had served him faithfully through 3 tours. The rifle, like its owner, had been officially retired but remained in perfect working order. As he worked, his mind drifted back to his last mission, the one that had led him to choose this quiet corner of Florida. It had been a high-stakes operation in the Philippines, targeting a terrorist cell that had been planning attacks on U.S. naval vessels. The mission had been successful, all targets eliminated with extreme precision, but the aftermath had left Marcus questioning his path. He'd seen too many good men die, too many operations compromised by politics and bureaucracy. After 20 years of service, the weight of all those kills, all those perfectly aligned shots, had begun to take its toll. He hadn't lost his edge. If anything, his skills had only sharpened with age. But he'd lost his taste for the game, or so he thought, until he noticed the cartel's presence in his new hometown. The sound of a boat engine caught his attention, pulling him from his memories. Through the workshop window, he watched as the same cigarette boat from earlier passed by again, this time moving slower, its occupants clearly studying the shoreline. Marcus recognized the tactic. They were mapping the area, identifying potential landing zones and escape routes. His phone buzzed with a text from Sheriff Martinez. "Need to talk. Doc's Diner, 30 mins." Sarah Martinez was one of the few people in town who knew about his background. They had developed a cautious professional relationship over the past year, sharing information about suspicious activities in the area. She was smart enough to know she needed allies, and discreet enough to keep his secrets. Marcus arrived at the diner early, choosing a corner booth with a clear view of both entrances and the parking lot. The evening crowd was starting to filter, in fishermen coming off their boats, families out for dinner, and the usual mix of locals and tourists. He noticed 3 unfamiliar faces at the counter, their expensive watches and 2 casual attire marking them as outsiders. Sarah arrived right on time, her sheriff's uniform replaced by civilian clothes, but the badge still visible on her hip. She slid into the booth across from Marcus. her expression grim. "They're getting bolder," she said without preamble, keeping her voice low. "Two of my deputies spotted them unloading something from a boat last night. When they went to investigate, they were warned off, not so politely." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. It was a classic cartel tactic. Start with subtle intimidation, then escalate. "They're testing boundaries," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Seeing how much resistance they'll face." "We're not equipped for this, Marcus," Sarah admitted, frustration evident in her tone. "My entire department is 6 people. We've got 1 patrol boat that barely runs, and the state police are 3 hours away. By the time they respond to anything, it'll be too late." Marcus studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the tension in her jaw. She was a good cop, dedicated to protecting her town, but she was right. They were outmatched. The cartel would have dozens of men, high-powered weapons, and virtually unlimited resources. "I might know some people," Marcus said carefully, "from my previous life. They could help us gather intelligence, maybe provide some support." It was a calculated risk, reaching out to his old contacts, but one he was willing to take. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. "There's something else. One of my informants says they're planning something big, not just using Cedar Key as a transit point. They want to set up a permanent operation here. They've already bought several properties through shell companies." The news settled like lead in Marcus's stomach. A permanent cartel presence would destroy Cedar Key, turning this peaceful fishing community into another war zone. He'd seen it happen before in other small towns. The violence, the corruption, the fear that would seep into every aspect of daily life. As if on cue, the bell above the diner's door chimed. The 3 men from the counter stood up, making their way toward the exit. As they passed Marcus's booth, one of them paused, making deliberate eye contact. The message was clear. They knew who he was, and they weren't intimidated. Marcus held the man's gaze, his expression neutral, but his mind already calculating angles, distances, and potential scenarios. The cartel might think they had found an easy target in Cedar Key, but they were about to learn a harsh lesson about underestimating quiet veterans in small towns. The next morning dawned grey and humid, with a heavy mist rolling in from the Gulf. Marcus was already at his usual spot on Palmer's Dock, but today he wasn't alone. 2 men lounged against the railing 30 feet away, their poses casual, but their attention fixed squarely on him. They were cartel soldiers, their rigid postures and concealed weapons obvious to his trained eye. Marcus ignored them, focusing instead on the remembrance of darker days that their presence had stirred. His mind drifted back to a mission in northern Afghanistan, where he'd spent 5 days motionless in a sniper hide, tracking a high-value target. The temperature had dropped well below freezing at night, but he hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. When the moment came, his shot had been perfect, 1 round, 1 kill, from over a mile away. The cartel men wouldn't know about that mission, or about the countless others that had earned him his reputation as Ghost Eye. They wouldn't know about the time in Yemen when he'd eliminated an entire terrorist cell over 3 days, picking them off one by one until their organization crumbled. They couldn't know that his seemingly peaceful retirement masked years of training and combat experience that had honed him into one of the deadliest snipers the Navy SEALs had ever produced. One of the men spat into the water and muttered something in Spanish. Marcus caught every word, another skill they didn't know he possessed. They were discussing him, debating whether the old fisherman was worth their time. The taller one thought he might be trouble, but his companion laughed it off. "He's just another gringo playing at being Hemingway," the second man said, his voice dripping with contempt. Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he reeled in his line. His peripheral vision caught movement at the end of the dock. 3. More cartel members had arrived, making their way toward him with deliberate slowness. Their leader, a muscular man with a silver chain around his neck, carried himself with the arrogance of someone used to intimidating others. "Nice morning for fishing, old man," the leader said, stopping a few feet from Marcus. His accent was thick, his tone mockingly polite. "Catch anything good?" Marcus turned slowly, taking in every detail. The leader wore an expensive watch, a Rolex Submariner, probably real. His shoes were Italian leather, impractical for the dock's weathered boards. The others were dressed more casually, but their clothes couldn't hide the bulges of concealed weapons. "Water's been quiet," Marcus replied, his voice steady and neutral. He noticed how they had positioned themselves, 3 in front, 2 behind, standard intimidation formation. Amateur work, really. In his prime, he'd faced much worse. The leader stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "Maybe you should find a new spot, this dock. It's not safe for old men anymore. Accidents happen, you understand." Behind his calm exterior, Marcus was already calculating. The leader was carrying a Glock 19 in a shoulder holster. The others had a mix of weapons. He spotted 2 more Glocks and what looked like a Sig Sauer. All easily concealed, all serious firepower. They were ready for violence, but trying to stay low profile. Interesting. "I've been fishing here a long time," Marcus said, beginning to pack up his gear. "Don't plan on changing my habits now." He moved with deliberate slowness, letting them think they were intimidating him. In reality, he was memorizing faces, noting distinctive features, assessing threats. The leader's smile vanished. "Listen, pendejo. Maybe you don't understand. This is our territory now. We own this dock, we own this town. You want to fish? You pay us for protection. Otherwise." He made a pushing motion toward the water. Marcus straightened up, allowing just a fraction of his military bearing to show through. For a brief moment, his eyes met the leader's, and something in that gaze made the other man take a small step back. It was just a flicker, a momentary glimpse of the predator beneath the peaceful exterior, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt. "I heard you the first time," Marcus said quietly, "and now you've heard me. I'm not leaving, and I'm not paying." He shouldered his tackle box and moved to walk past them, knowing they wouldn't act. Not here, not now. They were still testing boundaries, still playing at being intimidating thugs. The leader grabbed Marcus's arm, fingers digging into muscle. "You're making a mistake, old man. A big mistake." His breath smelled of cigars and expensive tequila. Marcus looked down at the hand on his arm, then back up at the leader's face. He said nothing, but something in his expression made the man's fingers loosen their grip. Without another word, Marcus walked away, his steps measured and calm. Behind him, he heard the leader say something about teaching the stubborn gringo a lesson. Marcus allowed himself another small smile. They would try, of course. They would come for him, probably at night, thinking to catch him off guard. They would bring more men, more guns, thinking numbers and firepower would guarantee victory. They would learn, as so many others had learned before them, that underestimating Marcus Reynolds was a fatal mistake. The cartel might own other towns, might intimidate other people, but they had just picked a fight with the wrong veteran. The quiet life he'd built here in Cedar Key was about to get very loud indeed. That evening, Marcus sat in his darkened living room, watching as 2 unmarked SUVs cruised slowly past his house for the 3rd time. The cartel was doing exactly what he expected, surveillance before action. They were professionals. He'd give them that, but their techniques were predictable. He'd written the book on some of these tactics during his time training SEAL teams. In his workshop, laid out on a clean cloth, was his disassembled Macmillan rifle. He'd spent the afternoon maintaining it, checking every component with practiced precision. The weapon was a work of art, custom built to his specifications with a match-grade barrel and a state-of-the-art scope. In the right hands, it could deliver pinpoint accuracy at distances exceeding a mile. In Marcus's hands, it was practically an extension of his own body. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah Martinez. They hit Jimmy's bait shop, roughed him up bad, hospital. Marcus's jaw tightened. Jimmy Peterson was 72 years old, had run that shop for 4 decades. The cartel was sending a message, showing the town what happened to people who didn't fall in line. Marcus moved to the hidden room beneath, his floorboards, accessing a sophisticated surveillance system he'd installed when he first bought the house. Multiple screens showed feeds from carefully hidden cameras covering all approaches to his property. Another monitor displayed thermal imaging of the surrounding area, technology that wasn't exactly legal for civilian use, but then again, Marcus had never quite fit the civilian category. He watched as a third SUV joined the patrol, this one moving slower than the others. Through the thermal imaging, he could see 5 heat signatures inside, more men than the other vehicles. They were getting ready to make their move, probably thinking the cover of darkness would give them an advantage. They didn't know that Marcus had spent most of his career operating in the dark, that nighttime was when he was most lethal. His phone buzzed again. This time it was from one of his old contacts in the intelligence community. Cartel cell Das Los Tiburones. Leader Jas Miguel El Dentista Herrera. Known for torture plus dental work on victims. Extremely dangerous. Body count. In Mexico. Actually 200 plus, now expanding into FL. Marcus processed this information with cold efficiency. He'd heard of El Dentista. The man had a reputation for sadistic creativity in dealing with his enemies. The fact that he was personally involved in this expansion meant Cedar Key was more important to the cartel than anyone had realized. Moving to his bedroom, Marcus opened his closet and pushed aside the hanging clothes, revealing a false back panel. Behind it was his combat gear, not the standard tactical equipment available to civilians, but specialized gear from his SEAL days. The matte black combat suit was made of cutting-edge materials, designed to minimize thermal signature and reduce noise. The vest contained ceramic plates capable of stopping high-caliber rounds, and the boots were custom-made for silent movement. As he suited up, Marcus reflected on the irony of the situation. He'd come to Cedar Key looking for peace, trying to escape the violence that had defined his military career. Now that same violence had found him, threatening the quiet life he'd built. But unlike the other residents of Cedar Key, he wasn't helpless. He'd spent 20 years preparing for situations exactly like this. Through his surveillance system, Marcus watched as the SUVs converged on his street, their headlights off. They were positioning themselves strategically, one vehicle at each end of the street, the third hanging back as a mobile command center. Standard cartel tactics, but executed with professional precision. These weren't just street thugs, they were trained soldiers. Marcus activated his night vision system, the familiar green glow illuminating his world. He could see 8 men moving into position around his house, all heavily armed. Their weapons were military-grade, M4 carbines with tactical attachments, not the usual cartel arsenal. This wasn't just a show of force. They had come prepared for serious combat. In his ear, a small radio receiver picked up their communications. They were speaking in coded Spanish, but Marcus had no trouble understanding. Their plan: they intended to breach the house from multiple points, overwhelm any resistance with superior numbers, and make an example of the stubborn gringo who had defied them. Marcus allowed himself a grim smile as he did one final equipment check. His rifle was ready, his sidearm secured, and various other weapons were positioned strategically throughout the house. He had turned his peaceful retirement home into a deadly maze of defensive positions and tactical advantages. though none of it was visible to the casual observer. The cartel soldiers were about to learn a harsh lesson about appearances. They saw an aging veteran in a modest beach house. What they were actually facing was a highly trained warrior in a carefully prepared battleground. Every angle was pre-calculated, every approach covered, every possible scenario planned for. Marcus hadn't survived countless combat missions by leaving anything to chance. As the first team moved toward his front door, Marcus switched off his surveillance monitors. He didn't need them anymore. Years of training had taught him to rely on his instincts, to become one with the darkness. The cartel had wanted to teach him a lesson about respect. Instead, they were about to receive an education in why some veterans are best left alone. The night air was thick with humidity as the cartel soldiers crept closer to Marcus's house. Their movements were practiced, professional, but to Marcus's trained eye, they might as well have been marching with flags and drums. Through his night vision goggles, he tracked their heat signatures as they moved into position, 4 men approaching the front door, 2 circling around back, and 2 more covering the sides. Marcus remained perfectly still in his chosen position, his breathing slow and controlled. This was familiar territory for him, reminiscent of countless operations in far-flung corners of the world. The weight of his rifle felt natural in his hands, like greeting an old friend. He'd positioned himself in a concealed spot on the 2nd floor, where he had clear lines of sight to all approaches. The team leader signaled silently to his men, directing them to their breach points. They were confident, sure of their superiority in numbers and firepower. Marcus could hear their radio chatter through his interceptor. They were speaking in quick, efficient bursts of coded Spanish, coordinating their assault. They expected to find an old veteran, probably asleep in his bed, an easy target for their show of force. What they didn't know was that Marcus had transformed his entire house into a combat zone. Every window was rigged with sensors, every door booby-trapped with non-lethal but highly effective countermeasures. The seemingly innocent garden lights were actually infrared markers, helping him range targets with deadly precision even in complete darkness. The first sign that this wasn't going to be a routine intimidation came when the rear team attempted to cut the house's power. Instead of plunging the property into darkness, they triggered Marcus's first surprise. A series of powerful floodlights hidden in the trees, instantly illuminating the entire yard and leaving the attackers exposed. The sudden light shattered their night vision, causing momentary confusion. Marcus didn't hesitate. In the span of 2 breaths, he put 2 rounds through the shoulders of the men at the back door, not killing shots, but precise hits that took them out of the fight. The suppressed rifle made little more noise than a sharp cough, but the effect was devastating. Before the other teams could react, 2 of their comrades were down, their weapons clattering uselessly to the ground. Contact. Back! Contact back! The team leader's voice crackled over the radio, panic evident in his tone. They had expected resistance, but not this level of precision, not these tactics. The remaining 6 men scrambled for cover, their practiced formation dissolving into chaos. Marcus was already moving, transitioning to a different firing position with the fluid grace of a practiced predator. His house was designed for this, multiple hidden passages and reinforced positions, allowing him to strike from unexpected angles. He emerged at a new window, just as one of the cartel soldiers tried to advance toward the front door. The shot was almost casual, a clean hit through the man's thigh, dropping him instantly. Non-lethal but unmistakably deliberate, Marcus could have killed any of them with headshots, but he had a different message to send. This wasn't about body count, it was about showing them they were hopelessly outmatched. "He's not alone, there. Must be more of them." Another voice on the radio, high with fear. Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. They couldn't comprehend that one man was systematically taking them apart. Their training told them they were facing a team of operators, not a single veteran with decades of experience. The team leader tried to rally his men, ordering them to concentrate fire on the second floor, but Marcus was already gone, moving through his house like a ghost. He emerged on the ground floor just as two more soldiers tried to breach the front door. The first one tripped Marcus's next surprise, a flashbang device hidden in the doorframe. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. Before the smoke cleared, Marcus had dropped both men with precise shots to their legs. 5 down, 3 to go. The remaining soldiers were now in full retreat, their confidence shattered by the surgical precision of the attacks. Through his thermal imaging, Marcus tracked the team leader and his 2 remaining men as they scrambled back toward their vehicles. Their radio channel was filled with panicked chatter now, calls for backup, mixing with curses and confusion. They had come expecting to terrorize an old man. Instead, they had stumbled into the killing ground of a master sniper. Marcus moved to his final firing position, sighting in on the team leader as he reached the first SUV. The shot was perfect, striking the vehicle's engine block and disabling it instantly. The second vehicle suffered the same fate moments later, leaving the attackers stranded and exposed. "Listen carefully," Marcus's voice came over their own radio channel, calm and measured. "I could have killed each of you 10 times over. Tonight was a warning. Tell El Dentista that Cedar Key is off limits. Next time, I won't be so selective with my shots." The silence that followed was deafening. The team leader, his bravado gone, keyed his radio with trembling fingers. Who are you?" Marcus's reply was simple. "Just a fisherman who doesn't like being interrupted." He watched through his scope as the realization dawned on their faces. They had grievously underestimated their target, and only his mercy had kept them alive to tell about it. Dawn broke over Cedar Key, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange as Marcus methodically cleaned his rifle. The events of the night had left no visible trace on his property. He'd already removed the shell casings and erased any evidence of the confrontation. The only signs of the battle were the dark stains on the pavement where the cartel soldiers had bled, and even those would wash away with the morning rain. Sheriff Martinez arrived just as Marcus finished his weapon maintenance, her unmarked car pulling up quietly to the curb. She got out slowly, her eyes scanning the scene with professional interest. "Got 8 men in the hospital," she said without preamble. "All with extremely precise gunshot wounds to non-lethal areas. Care to explain?" Marcus continued his cleaning, his movements precise and practiced. "Hunting accident," he replied dryly. "They should be more careful where they point their weapons at night." Sarah's lip twitched, but she maintained her serious expression. "The local hospital's saying they've never seen shooting like this. Perfect placement, consistent depth, surgical precision, almost like they were shot by a..." She paused, looking directly at him. "Ghost." The reference to his old call sign didn't escape Marcus's notice. He set down his cleaning cloth and met her gaze. "They came looking for a fight, they found one. Question is, what happens next?" "That's what I'm here about," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. She showed him a series of messages from her contacts in law enforcement. Words already reached. "El Dentista, he's not happy. These weren't just any soldiers. They were his personal security team, the best he had." Marcus absorbed this information without reaction, though internally he was already calculating the implications. El Dentista wouldn't take this humiliation lightly. The cartel leader had built his reputation on brutal retaliation against anyone who dared to oppose him. "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice dropping lower. "My contact in the DEA says El Dentista's called in specialists, professional hitmen from Mexico. They're offering $100,000 for information about you." $100,000. Marcus almost smiled. In his SEAL days, there had been times when the bounty on his head had been in the millions. Still, it meant things were about to get complicated. Money had a way of loosening tongues, turning friends into informants. "How's Jimmy?" Marcus asked, changing the subject. The old bait shop owner's beating had been the catalyst for last night's events, though the cartel didn't know it yet. "Stable, broken ribs, fractured jaw. Doctor says he'll recover, but he's scared. The whole town's scared, Marcus. Last night's shooting, word spreading fast. People know something's happening, even if they don't know what." Marcus stood, moving to his workshop window. From here, he could see the dock where everything had started. The morning fishing. Boats were heading out, their captains unaware that their peaceful harbor had become a battlefield. "El Dentista doesn't know who he's dealing with yet," Marcus said quietly. "Last night's team, they were good, but they were used to intimidating civilians. They weren't prepared for someone who knows their playbook, who's written some of the chapters they're reading from." Sarah stepped closer, her voice urgent. "I've got state police offering support, but we both know that won't be enough. These cartels, they've got politicians in their pockets, judges on their payroll. They'll find a way to operate legally, hide behind paperwork and permits." "Then we'll have to be smarter," Marcus replied. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were photographs, surveillance shots of cartel operations he'd been gathering for months. "I haven't been just fishing. All this time, every boat, every face, every license plate. I've documented it all." Sarah leafed through the photos, her eyes widening. This is incredible. With this kind of evidence." "It won't be enough." Marcus cut her off. "Not for court, but it tells us their patterns, their habits, and more importantly, it tells us who's working with them locally." He spread out a map of the coastline, pointing to specific locations. "They're using these channels here and here, small boats coming in at night, meeting larger vessels offshore. The operation's bigger than just Cedar Key. It's part of a supply line running all the way up the coast." Sarah studied the map, her law enforcement training kicking in. "If we could disrupt their supply line, we'd force El Dentista to either back off or show his hand," Marcus finished. "But first, we need to deal with these specialists he's bringing in. They'll be different from last night's team, more patient, more skilled. They'll study their target, learn patterns, wait for the perfect moment." "Like you would," Sarah said, understanding dawning in her eyes. Marcus nodded grimly. "Like I would. Which means this isn't over. Last night was just the opening move in a much longer game. El Dentista thinks he's dealing with a stubborn old veteran who got lucky. Soon he'll realize he's at war with someone who spent their entire life perfecting the art of hunting men exactly like him." The next 3 days passed in tense silence. Marcus maintained his routine, appearing each morning at his usual spot on Palmer's dock, but his fishing rod now concealed a high-powered spotting scope. Through it, he observed the steady stream of unfamiliar faces filtering into Cedar Key. They arrived in ones and twos, trying to blend in as tourists or seasonal workers, but their movements betrayed their true purpose. El Dentista's specialists had arrived, and they were good, very good. They maintained their distance, never making direct contact, building a comprehensive surveillance net around their target. Marcus counted at least 12 new operatives, all demonstrating the patience and discipline that marked them as professional killers rather than common cartel soldiers. On the 4th morning, Marcus noticed the first real change in their pattern. A sleek yacht had appeared in the harbor, far more expensive than the usual fishing boats and pleasure craft. Through his scope, he could see the man standing on the upper deck, tall, immaculately dressed in a white linen suit, his silver hair gleaming in the morning sun. Even at this distance, The gold dental work that had earned him his nickname was visible when he smiled. El Dentista had come personally to oversee the operation. It was a statement of intent, a message that this wasn't just about business anymore. This was about pride, about showing what happened to those who dared to challenge the cartel's authority. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from one of his old SEAL contacts. Satellite shows 3 more boats incoming, heavy weapons, professional, crew. They're not playing anymore. He typed back a single word. Good. Because what El Dentista didn't understand was that this was exactly what Marcus had been waiting for. The cartel leader's pride had driven him to commit significant resources to this operation, pulling assets from other territories, concentrating his best men in one location. It was the same mistake Marcus had seen countless high-value targets make during his military career, letting ego override tactical wisdom. In his workshop, Marcus reviewed the intelligence he'd gathered. The specialists weren't just watching him. They were building a detailed picture of Cedar Key's infrastructure. They had identified power substations, communication hubs, and critical access points. Their plan was becoming clear. They intended to isolate the town before making their move. Marcus's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Sheriff Martinez. Coast Guard reporting unusual activity 20 miles offshore. Multiple fast boats running without lights. The pieces were falling into place. The cartel was positioning forces for a coordinated assault, probably timed to coincide with the new moon in 2 days, when the nights would be at their darkest. They would cut power to the town, jam communications, and move in from multiple directions. Simultaneously, Marcus moved to his planning table, where a detailed map of Cedar Key and its surrounding waters was spread out. He had marked key locations with small pins: red for confirmed cartel positions, blue for likely attack routes, green for his own prepared positions. The pattern that emerged confirmed his suspicions about their intended strategy. He keyed. His secure radio, connecting to a frequency few people knew existed. Ghost eye to watchman. You seeing what I'm seeing? The response came immediately. The voice belonging to his former spotter from his SEAL days. Affirmative. Thermal imaging shows their staging equipment in 3 locations, looking at a force of about 30 combatants, not counting boat crews. They've got some serious hardware, military grade, possibly stolen from Mexican army supplies. Marcus studied the map again, his mind running through scenarios with machine-like precision. They'll hit the power station first, then the cell. Towers. Probably have teams in place to block the main roads. Standard cartel playbook for taking over small towns. Want me to call in some favors? Watchman asked. I know a few teams that would love to crash this party. Marcus considered it for a moment. Having backup would certainly make things easier, but it would also mean more variables, more potential for collateral damage. Negative, keep monitoring, but this needs to be handled quietly. We start a war here. Innocent people get caught in the crossfire. He moved to his weapons cache, beginning the meticulous process of preparing for what was to come. Each weapon was checked and rechecked, magazines loaded with specific ammunition types for different scenarios. He had no intention of waiting. For their assault, that would play into their strengths, give them the initiative. Through his window, Marcus could see El Dentista's yacht, still anchored prominently in the harbor. The cartel leader was making no attempt to hide his presence, now confident in his position of strength. He probably thought the show of force would intimidate the town, break their will to resist before the real violence began. But El Dentista had overlooked something crucial. In focusing all his attention on Marcus, he had failed to secure his own position. The yacht that was meant to display his power and authority had become a perfect target, a fixed position that Marcus had already ranged from multiple angles. Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he loaded his rifle. Sometimes the best way to win a complex game was to change the rules entirely. El Dentista was preparing for an elaborate operation, but he was about to learn that some veterans don't play by cartel rules. The sun was setting over Cedar Key, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson when Marcus began his counter-offensive. He had spent the day watching El Dentista's men solidify their positions, letting them think they were operating undetected. Now, as darkness approached, it was time to show them the error of their overconfidence. Marcus's first move wasn't an attack. It was a message. Using a sophisticated electronic warfare kit he'd maintained from his SEAL days, he hijacked the Cartel's secure radio frequency. The sound of his voice, calm and measured, caught them completely off guard. "You have 1 hour to leave Cedar Key," he transmitted in perfect Spanish. "After that, I start hunting." The effect was immediate. The carefully coordinated movements of El Dentista's specialists faltered as uncertainty crept into their operations. On his yacht, El Dentista received the transmission with visible rage. Through his scope, Marcus watched the cartel leader smash a glass against the deck, barking orders at his men. Pride would force him to respond aggressively. It was the predictable move of a man unused to being challenged. Sure enough, within minutes, 3 teams of specialists began moving toward Marcus's house. They were good, using cover and concealment effectively, maintaining professional discipline despite their leader's anger. But Marcus wasn't there. He had already relocated to his first prepared position, a concealed nest in an abandoned fishing warehouse overlooking the marina. "Package is moving." Watchman's voice crackled in his earpiece. 3 boats leaving the yacht, heading for the docks. Looks like they're not waiting for darkness. Marcus adjusted his scope, tracking the boats as they approached. Each vessel carried 4 armed men, their weapons clearly visible. El Dentista was abandoning subtlety for speed, trying to overwhelm his target with superior numbers. "Time to educate them," Marcus muttered. He had already ranged every approach to the docks, calculated wind speed and direction, and accounted for the gathering darkness. The first shot wasn't meant to kill. It struck the engine block of the lead boat with surgical precision, disabling it instantly. The other boats scattered, their occupants scanning frantically for the source of the shot. Marcus waited patiently, letting the fear build. 3 minutes passed before one of the boat crews made their first mistake, clustering together for a hushed conference. The second shot struck the water just inches from their hull. Another warning, another demonstration of his absolute control over the situation. "Ghost Eye, we've got movement at the power station," Watchman reported. "Looks like they're trying to implement their blackout plan early." Marcus had anticipated this. "Let them," he replied. "They're about to learn why some predators prefer the dark." The town's lights went out, sector by sector, as the cartel teams cut power. They didn't realize that Marcus had spent months preparing for this exact scenario. His night vision equipment was generations ahead of anything they possessed, and he had memorized every angle, every shadow, every potential point of cover in his operational area. Through his thermal scope, Marcus watched as El Dentista's men moved with increasing desperation. Their coordinated assault had devolved into a reactive scramble as they tried to locate a ghost who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. A single shot rang out from Marcus's position, striking the yacht's sophisticated communication array. The message was clear. El Dentista was now cut off from his support network, isolated in what he had thought was a secure command position. "Sir," one of the specialists radioed to El Dentista, his voice tense. "We can't locate the shooter. He's using angles that shouldn't be possible. This isn't just a veteran. This is someone with extensive special operations experience." El Dentista's response was immediate and predictable. "I don't care who he is. Find him. Use every man we have." Marcus allowed himself a grim smile as he relocated to his second firing position. The cartel leader was reacting exactly as expected, letting emotion override strategy. In doing so, he was making the same mistake that had sealed the fate of countless targets in Marcus's military career, concentrating his forces against a threat they couldn't see or understand. Through his earpiece, Marcus could hear the growing chaos in the cartel's communications. Teams were reporting shots from impossible angles, precise hits that disabled vehicles and equipment without killing. Each incident increased their paranoia, made them see threats in every shadow. "Ghost Eye," Watchman's voice came through clearly. "Thermal shows they're pulling back to defensive positions around the yacht. They're scared." "Good," Marcus replied, setting up for his next shot. "Fear makes men stupid. Stupid men make mistakes. And mistakes." He squeezed the trigger, sending another round into the yacht's backup radio antenna. "Get you. Killed." The night was still young, and Marcus was just getting started. He had spent years perfecting the art of psychological warfare, learning how to break an enemy's will before breaking their bodies. El Dentista was about to receive an education in why some veterans are best left alone, and why assuming someone's age or appearance makes them an easy target is often a fatal mistake. El Dentista stood on his yacht's deck, his pristine white suit now wrinkled from stress, his golden teeth glinting in the emergency lights as he snarled orders into a satellite phone. His carefully planned operation was unraveling, and for the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: fear. "I want every available man here by morning," he barked into the phone. "I don't care what it costs. This old man has made me look weak. He dies tonight." But even as he spoke the words, another precision shot rang out, destroying the satellite phone in his hand. The message was clear. There would be no reinforcements. Marcus watched through his scope as El Dentista's composure finally cracked. The cartel leader's reputation had been built on an aura of invincibility, on the belief that his resources and ruthlessness made him untouchable. Now that illusion was being systematically destroyed by an opponent he couldn't see or fight. "Watchman, status report," Marcus whispered into his radio. "They're falling apart, Ghost Eye. 2 teams trying to fall back to the yacht, 1 pinned down near the power station. El Dentista's personal security is getting twitchy. They've already fired." At 3 shadows, thinking they saw movement. Marcus had seen this before in his military days. Professional soldiers could become dangerous when fear took hold, their training giving way to panic. He needed to end this before their random firing hurt innocent civilians. Through his thermal scope, he watched as one of the specialist teams attempted to set up a defensive position near the marina office. They were good, using proper coverage and fields of fire, but their fear made them predictable. They were preparing for a frontal assault, not understanding that they were dealing with a predator who never attacked as expected. Marcus switched positions, moving silently through the darkness to a perch he'd prepared on top of an old fish processing plant. From here, he had a perfect view of both the marina and El Dentista's yacht. The cartel's night vision equipment was useless against his advanced thermal imaging, which showed him every movement, every attempt at concealment. "Sir," one of the specialists called over the radio, "we've got movement at the north end of the marina." El Dentista grabbed a spare radio. "Then shoot, you idiots! Shoot anything that moves!" The specialists opened fire, their automatic weapons lighting up the darkness as they shot at shadows. Marcus waited patiently, letting them waste ammunition and reveal their positions. The sound of gunfire echoed across the water, shattering the night silence and undoubtedly waking every resident of Cedar Key. When the firing finally stopped, Marcus made his move. 3 shots, precisely placed, disabled the weapons of the team near the marina office. Before the other teams could react, he had already relocated, leaving them firing blindly at his previous position. "Ghost Eye," Watchman's voice crackled in his ear. Sheriff Martinez reports locals are secure in the designated safe zones. You're clear to proceed to Phase 2. Marcus acknowledged with a click of his radio. Phase 2 would demonstrate to El Dentista just how completely he had lost control of the situation. One by one, he began targeting the cartel's vehicles, not destroying them, but methodically disabling each one with precise shots to engines and fuel lines. The cartel leader's rage was visible even from a distance as he watched his escape. Options disappear. Find him, El Dentista screamed into his radio. I want his head, I want his heart. I will personally pull every tooth from his corpse. But his men were no longer responding with their previous discipline. Some were huddled behind cover, others were firing randomly into the darkness, and a few had simply frozen in place, overwhelmed by the psychological pressure of fighting an invisible enemy. Marcus keyed his radio again, broadcasting on the cartel's frequency. Your men are scared, Dentista. They should be. I could have killed each of them a dozen times over, but I wanted you to watch as I took apart your operation piece by piece. Now it's time to finish this. El Dentista grabbed his radio, his voice shaking with fury. You think you can threaten me? Do you know who I am? What I've done to men who dared to challenge me? I know exactly who you are, Marcus replied. Calmly, the question is, do you know who you're dealing with? Look at your men. Look at your boats. Look at how easily I've trapped you here. Still think I'm just some old fisherman. The cartel leader's response was cut short by another shot, this one splitting the radio in his hand. In the same instant, every light on his yacht went dark, leaving him illuminated only by the stars and the emergency lights of the surrounding boats. Marcus settled into his final firing position, his scope centered on El Dentista's chest. The cartel leader stood frozen on his deck, finally understanding that he had gravely miscalculated. He had come to Cedar Key expecting to find an easy target, a simple show of force against a stubborn veteran. Instead, he had walked into a trap, set by one of the deadliest snipers in military history. The night had reached its darkest hour when Marcus initiated the final phase of his plan. El Dentista stood exposed on his yacht's deck, his white suit making him an almost laughably easy target in Marcus's thermal scope. But a quick death wasn't what Marcus had in mind. This needed to end in a way that would send a message far, beyond Cedar Key. Your men are down to their last magazines, Marcus transmitted on the cartel frequency. Your boats are disabled. Your communications are cut. Want to know what happens next? El Dentista's response was to draw a gold-plated Desert Eagle from his jacket, firing wildly into the darkness. The massive handgun's muzzle flash lit up the night, but the shots were desperate, uncontrolled, the actions of a man unused to. Being powerless, Marcus waited patiently, letting the cartel leader empty his weapon. Each shot that echoed across the water was another crack in El Dentista's carefully constructed image of invincibility. When the firing finally stopped, Marcus spoke again. 20 years in the Navy SEALs. His voice was calm, almost conversational. Over 200 confirmed kills. They called me Ghost Eye because the shot that killed you was the first sign you were ever in my sights. Your men weren't facing a retired veteran. They were facing a predator who spent decades perfecting the art of hunting men exactly like you. The revelation hit El Dentista like a physical blow. His face, visible in perfect detail through Marcus's scope, showed the dawning recognition. The cartel's intelligence had failed catastrophically. They hadn't just underestimated their target, they'd completely misidentified the level of threat. Ghost Eye. El Dentista's voice shook slightly. I've heard of you. They said you died in Afghanistan. The reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Marcus replied, allowing himself a grim smile. I chose this quiet life, this peaceful town. You chose to threaten it. Bad decision. Through his scope, Marcus watched as The remaining cartel specialists tried to form a defensive ring around their leader. Their movements were professional but futile. He had clear shots at all of them, could end this at any moment of his choosing. "What do you want?" El Dentista demanded, his earlier bravado replaced by something approaching desperation. "Money? I can make you rich beyond imagination." Marcus's response was a single shot that shattered the gold watch on El Dentista's wrist. "I want you to understand something fundamental about men like me. We don't retire because we can't fight anymore. We retire because we're tired of fighting. But push us hard enough." Another shot, this one splitting El Dentista's leather belt. The cartel leader flinched, his hands instinctively rising in surrender. "Your reputation, your power, your money, none of it matters here," Marcus continued. "You're alive right now because I choose to let you live. Your men are alive because I choose not to kill them. That's a level of control you've never experienced before, isn't it? Being completely at someone else's mercy." El Dentista's composure cracked entirely. "Please," he whispered into his radio, all pretense of strength gone. "What do you want me to do?" "Simple," Marcus replied. "You're going to order your men to surrender to the authorities. You're going to provide evidence of every corrupt official on your payroll. And most importantly, you're going to ensure that Cedar Key and its surrounding waters become a no-go zone for your entire organization." "And if I refuse?" Marcus's answer was another shot, this one removing the golden dental work that had given El Dentista his nickname. The cartel leader staggered, spitting blood and gold onto his pristine deck. "That was just your front teeth," Marcus said quietly. "I can do this all night, one shot at a time, until there's nothing left of your reputation but a cautionary tale about why some veterans should be left in peace." In the distance, police sirens began to wail. Sheriff Martinez had timed her arrival perfectly, waiting until Marcus had completely broken the cartel's will to resist. "Last chance," Marcus transmitted. "Surrender now, or I start taking shots that can't be fixed with cosmetic surgery." El Dentista's response was immediate and absolute. He ordered his men to drop their weapons, then knelt on the deck with his hands behind his head. One by one, his specialists followed suit, their training finally giving way to the realization that they were hopelessly outmatched. As police boats approached the yacht, Marcus maintained his position, scope trained on the scene. He watched as Sarah Martinez personally took El Dentista into custody, the once fearsome cartel leader now reduced to a shaking, bleeding shadow of his former self. "Ghost Eye, we're clear," Watchman reported. "All targets in custody. Looks like the message has been received." Marcus lowered his rifle, allowing himself to feel the weight of the night's events. El Dentista's arrest would send shockwaves through the criminal underworld, not just because of his capture, but because of how completely his organization had been dismantled by a single opponent. Dawn was breaking over Cedar Key as Marcus watched the last police boat disappear toward the mainland, El Dentista and his captured men secured below deck. The morning light revealed the full extent of the night's events. Disabled vehicles scattered across the marina, bullet holes marking buildings, and the cartel leader's yacht sitting silent and dark in the harbor. Sheriff Martinez approached. Marcus as he packed away his gear, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. DEA's already calling this one of the biggest cartel busts in Florida history. El Dentista's singing like a canary, naming names, revealing operations all along the coast. You didn't just catch a cartel leader, you broke their entire regional network. Marcus continued his methodical equipment check, his movements precise and practiced. He was arrogant, he said simply, thought his money and reputation made him untouchable. Men like that, they've forgotten what real fear feels like. Sometimes they need a reminder. Sarah watched him work, noting how his hands never seemed to stop moving, always checking, always preparing. "You know this isn't over, right? The cartel's a hydra. Cut off one head, another grows back. There'll be others who might come looking for revenge. A ghost of a smile crossed Marcus's face. Let them come. I chose Cedar Key because it reminded me of places I'd protected before. Small communities where good people just want to live in peace. Sometimes that peace needs to be defended. He moved to the edge of the dock, looking out over the water where fishing boats were starting to head out for their morning runs. The normalcy of the scene was almost surreal after the night's events, but it was exactly what he had fought to preserve. "Ghost Eye!" Watchman's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Got some chatter you need to hear. Cartel's second-in-command in Miami just called an emergency meeting. Word of El Dentista's capture is spreading fast." Marcus acknowledged with a slight nod, though he knew Watchman couldn't see it. The cartel would be scrambling now, trying to contain the damage, assess the threat. They would soon learn that their leader hadn't just been captured, he had been systematically broken, turned into an informant by one man with a rifle and the patience of a hunter. "The town's talking," Sarah continued, gesturing toward the gathering crowd of locals at the cafe up the street. They saw the lights, heard the gunfire. They're scared, but they're also curious. They want to know who really lives among them. "Let them wonder," Marcus replied. "Sometimes a reputation for being dangerous is enough to keep the peace. El Dentista learned that lesson the hard way. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should fear most." He thought about the cartel leader's face when the truth had finally dawned on him, when he realized he hadn't been fighting some stubborn old veteran, but one of the most lethal snipers in military history. The fear in his eyes had been familiar. Marcus had seen it countless times through his scope in operations across the globe. "My contact in the FBI says they're moving El Dentista to a secure facility," Sarah added. "They're worried about assassination attempts. Apparently, he's offering to testify against every major cartel figure he's dealt with in the past decade." Marcus wasn't surprised. Men like El Dentista survived by understanding which way the wind was blowing. Right now, federal protection probably looked a lot more appealing than facing the cartel's retribution for his failure. "You should know," Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "There's already talk about medal citations, commendations. The governor wants to personally thank the hero who cleaned up Cedar Key." Marcus shook his head slightly. "No ceremonies, no medals. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because this is my home now, and I protect what's mine." He began, breaking down his rifle, each component disappearing into specially designed compartments in his fishing gear. To anyone watching, he would appear to be just another fisherman packing up after a long night on the water. "Besides," he continued, "the best deterrent is uncertainty. Let them wonder about the ghost in Cedar Key. Let them tell stories about the night El Dentista's empire crumbled. Fear works better than fame for keeping the peace." Sarah nodded, understanding. She had seen enough in her law enforcement career to know that sometimes the most effective protectors were the ones who stayed in the shadows, who let their actions speak louder than any public acknowledgement. "What now?" she asked, watching, as the morning sun climbed higher, painting the water in shades of gold. Marcus shouldered his gear, his movements displaying none of the fatigue one might expect after such an intense night of combat. Now I go fishing. There's a spot on the dock that needs watching, and the morning tide's just right for snapper." His casual tone belied the subtle message. He would resume his vigil, watching over Cedar Key with the same patience and precision that had made him legendary in the special operations community. Any other cartel thinking of moving into the territory would face the same choice as El Dentista: leave in peace or leave in pieces. The following week brought changes to Cedar Key that few could have predicted. News of El Dentista's capture had spread through criminal networks like wildfire, though the official story barely scratched the surface of what had really happened. The papers talked about a joint law enforcement operation, But in the underworld, different stories circulated. Whispered tales of a ghost who haunted the waters, a sniper who could kill from impossible distances. Marcus watched it all unfold from his usual spot on Palmer's dock, his fishing rod serving its dual purpose of maintaining his cover and concealing high-end surveillance equipment. The cartel's remaining operations along the coast were in chaos, their carefully constructed networks crumbling as El Dentista's confessions led to raids and arrests up and down Florida's coastline. "Ghost Eye, you're going to want to hear this." Watchman's voice came through his concealed earpiece. "Just intercepted some interesting chatter. Cartel's upper management in Mexico is issuing new orders. Cedar Key's been declared off limits. They're pulling out of all operations within 50 miles of the coast." Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he adjusted his line. The cartel's response was exactly what he'd hoped for. Sometimes the threat of an unseen enemy was more effective than any show of force. They couldn't fight what they couldn't see, couldn't counter an opponent they didn't understand. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Martinez. "FBI debriefing. Complete. El Dentista gave up everything. Safe houses, smuggling routes, corrupt officials. Haven't seen the feds this excited since the fall of Capone." The mention of corrupt officials particularly interested Marcus. He'd suspected that the cartel's operation in Cedar Key had benefited from political protection, and now those suspicions were being confirmed. Already, 3 state judges and a handful of local officials along the coast had been arrested, their connections to the cartel exposed by El Dentista's testimony. Jimmy Peterson, the bait shop owner, whose beating had helped trigger this whole conflict, had reopened his store. His jaw was still wired shut, but his eyes carried a new confidence. The cartel's attempt to intimidate him had backfired spectacularly, turning a simple shopkeeper into a symbol of resistance. The morning crowd at the dock was different now, too. The fishermen who had always given Marcus a wide berth were now nodding in greeting, their respect evident but unspoken. They didn't know the details of what had happened that night, but they understood that something had changed, that their quiet neighbor was more than he appeared. "More news coming in," Watchman reported. "Cartel's putting out the word through their channels. Anyone thinking of moving into Cedar Key gets a simple warning. Remember El Dentista. But your reputation's growing, Ghost Eye." Marcus processed this information with his usual calm detachment. Reputation was a double-edged sword in his line of work. On one hand, it could serve as a deterrent, keeping potential threats at bay. On the other, it could attract attention from the wrong kind of people, thrill-seekers and glory hunters looking to make a name for themselves. A cigarette boat roared past the dock, its wake rocking the smaller fishing vessels. A week ago, such a boat would have carried cartel observers or smuggled goods. Now it was just tourists, enjoying the water without realizing how close their peaceful paradise had come to becoming a war zone. "You've started something bigger than Cedar Key," Sarah said, approaching his spot on the dock. She wasn't in uniform today, but her badge still hung at her hip. "El Dentista's confession. It's like pulling a thread that's unraveling their whole operation. DEA's talking about the biggest shakeup in cartel hierarchy since Pablo Escobar." Marcus reeled in his line, checking the bait with practiced efficiency. "That wasn't the goal," he replied quietly. "I just wanted them out of our town." Sarah leaned against the railing, watching the morning light play across the water. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest stands. One man defending his home becomes a symbol, a reminder that these organizations aren't invincible. She was right, though Marcus would never acknowledge it openly. His actions had done more than just protect Cedar Key. They had exposed the vulnerability of cartel operations that relied on fear and intimidation. When that fear was turned back on them, when they became the hunted instead of the hunters, their whole system began to crumble. My sources say there's already infighting, Sarah continued. El Dentista's replacement in Miami lasted 6 hours before someone decided he was too ambitious. They're tearing themselves apart, paranoid about who might be next. Marcus nodded slightly, processing this information. Chaos in the cartel's ranks meant they would be too busy fighting among themselves to think about retaliation. It was an added layer of protection for Cedar Key, though he would remain vigilant. Years of combat experience had taught him that the most dangerous moment often came when you thought the threat was over. Just remember, Sarah added, her voice dropping lower, if they do come back, if they do try something. She let the sentence hang unfinished. Marcus's response was simple, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. Then I'll be here, watching and waiting. Some lessons need to be taught more than once. 2 weeks after El Dentista's capture, the calm that had settled over Cedar Key was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Marcus spotted the black SUV with government plates rolling down the main street, its polished surface standing out among the weathered pickup trucks and fishing boats that usually populated the town. The vehicle stopped near Palmer's dock, and a man in an immaculate suit stepped out, his bearing unmistakably military despite his civilian clothes. Marcus recognized him immediately, Colonel James Harrison, his former commanding officer from his SEAL days. "Ghost Eye," the colonel said quietly, approaching Marcus's usual fishing spot. "Or should I just call you Marcus now?" Marcus continued, watching his line, though his senses were alert to every movement around them. "Bit far from Virginia, aren't you, Colonel? Cedar Key's not exactly on the way to anywhere." Harrison leaned against the railing, his posture casual, but his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, old habits that never quite died. Word travels fast in certain circles. When El Dentista started singing to the feds, a lot of people took notice. The way he was taken down, it had a familiar signature. "I'm retired," Marcus replied simply, adjusting his grip on the fishing rod. "Just enjoying the quiet life." The colonel smiled slightly. "Retired? The man I knew never retired from anything. He just found new battlefields." He paused, watching a pelican dive for fish nearby. "What you did here, it's having ripple effects far beyond Florida. The cartels are scrambling. Their whole operation model is being questioned. When one of their most feared leaders can be broken by a single opponent." Marcus finally turned to face his former commander. "That's not why you're here. You didn't drive all this way to discuss cartel politics." "No," Harrison admitted. "I came because we've got a situation developing. Something that requires your particular skill set. The kind of operation that needs a ghost." "Not interested," Marcus said firmly, returning his attention to the water. "I made my choice when I left. This is my home now. These are my people." Harrison nodded, as if expecting this response. "I understand, but before you make your final decision, you should know what we're dealing with. The intel El Dentista provided. It goes deeper than just drug trafficking. We've uncovered connections to terrorist cells, human trafficking operations, even potential dirty bomb materials." Marcus's expression remained neutral, but his mind was already processing the implications. If Harrison was telling the truth, this went far beyond simple cartel violence. It was the kind of threat that could make his victory in Cedar Key seem insignificant by comparison. "The cartels are just one piece of a larger puzzle," Harrison continued. "They're the visible part of an operation that stretches across continents. What you did here, breaking El Dentista, exposing their vulnerabilities, it's created an opportunity. For the first time in decades, we have a chance to strike at the heart of their entire network." A fishing boat passed by, its wake rocking the smaller vessels tied to the dock. Marcus watched it go, thinking about the peaceful life he'd built here, the community he'd chosen to protect, but he also thought about the larger threats that Harrison was describing, threats that could eventually find their way to places like Cedar Key. "I'm not asking you to come back permanently," Harrison said, sensing Marcus's internal debate. "Just one operation, a chance to finish what you started here, but on a global scale. After that, you can return to your fishing and your quiet life." Marcus reeled in his line, checking the bait with practiced precision. "You know it's never just one operation. There's always another mission, another target, another reason why they need the best." "True," Harrison acknowledged, "but sometimes the best is the only option we have. The intel has a short window. We need someone who can work alone, who can infiltrate their operations the way you did here, someone they already fear." The morning sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the dock. In the distance, Marcus could see the cafe opening for breakfast, locals going about their daily routines, unaware of the conversation taking place or the decisions being weighed. "Let me be clear," Marcus said finally, his voice low but firm. "If, and that's a big if, I consider this, I do it my way. No political interference, no compromises, and Cedar Key remains off limits. This place, these people, they stay protected." Harrison straightened up, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Would I have driven all this way if I wasn't prepared to give you full operational control? You're not just the best option, Marcus. You're the only option." Marcus began packing up his gear, his movements unhurried but purposeful. "I'll need to see the intel first, all of it, and I choose my support team, starting with Watchman." "Already arranged," Harrison replied. "He's standing by. Said something about being tired of monitoring fishing boats anyway." The evening found Marcus in his workshop, studying the classified files Harrison had left behind. Spread across his workbench were satellite photos, intelligence reports, and surveillance data that painted a disturbing picture. The cartel's operation in Cedar Key had been just the tip of an iceberg that ran deeper and darker than anyone in town could have imagined. "It's worse than we thought," Watchman's voice came through the secure line. El Dentista's confession was just the beginning. Every new piece of intel opens up 3 more connections. The network spans 4 continents, involves at least 6 major criminal organizations, and has tentacles in places we never suspected. Marcus studied a particular photograph showing a cargo ship in the Mediterranean. To the untrained eye, it looked like any other commercial vessel, but he could spot the subtle modifications that marked it as something far more sinister. "They're using legitimate shipping routes," he observed, his tactical mind already analyzing patterns, hidden in plain sight, just like they tried to do here in Cedar Key, but on a global scale. Sarah Martinez arrived as he was examining the files, her expression grave. She had been briefed on the situation, her position as local law enforcement, making her a valuable asset in understanding the bigger picture. "The FBI's running raids all along the coast," she reported, settling into a chair. "Every piece of information El Dentista provided is leading to more arrests, more seizures. But these new connections Harrison's talking about, this is different. This is bigger than just drug trafficking." Marcus nodded, pulling up another file. "They're moving weapons, nuclear materials, people, using the drug routes as cover for something much worse. The cartels are just the public face. There's another organization behind them pulling the strings." He moved to his weapons cache, beginning the familiar routine of checking and preparing his equipment. The actions were automatic, ingrained by years of similar preparations before countless missions. "You're going to take Harrison's offer, aren't you?" Sarah asked, though it wasn't really a question. She had seen the look in his eyes as he studied the intelligence, the same focused intensity that had preceded El Dentista's downfall. "Someone has to," Marcus replied simply. "What happened here in Cedar Key, it opened a door, showed us their vulnerabilities. Now we have a chance to shut down not just one cartel, but an entire network of international criminals. He paused at his workbench, running his hand along the custom-built rifle that had helped him protect his adopted home. But Cedar Key comes first. I need your word that the town will be protected while I'm gone. Sarah straightened in her chair. Already arranged. State police are increasing patrols, and I've got direct lines to federal response teams. Nobody's going to try anything here. Your reputation made sure of that. Through his workshop window, Marcus could see the lights of fishing boats returning to harbor for the evening. The sight reminded him of why he had chosen this place, why he had fought so hard to protect it. But it also reminded him that there were other communities, other innocent people who needed protection from the shadows that threatened them. "Watchmen, start preparations," he commanded over the secure line. "I want full surveillance coverage of every suspected site within 48 hours. We do this right, we do it clean, and we do it so thoroughly they never recover." "Like old times," Watchman replied, a hint of excitement in his voice. "Ghost Eye and Watchman hunting in the dark. I'll have everything ready by tomorrow morning." Marcus turned to Sarah, his expression serious. "If I do this, I do it my way. No political interference, no compromises. The same rules that applied here in Cedar Key. I hunt them until they understand that some lines can't be crossed." "Harrison already agreed to your terms," Sarah reminded him. "Full operational control, no restrictions. They know what you can do now. El Dentista made sure of that. They're not going to risk losing you by trying to control how you work." Marcus began methodically packing specialized equipment into an unmarked bag. Each item was chosen with the precision of someone who had spent decades perfecting their craft. "This won't be like Cedar Key," he warned. "This time we're not just protecting one town, we're taking down an entire network." Sarah watched him work, understanding the weight of the decision he was making. "The quiet life was nice while it lasted," she observed. "It's not over," Marcus corrected her. "Cedar Key is still home, still my responsibility, but sometimes protecting home means taking the fight elsewhere, making sure the threats never reach our shores." The night was settling over the Gulf, bringing with it the familiar sounds of waves against the dock and distant boat engines. Tomorrow, Marcus would begin a new hunt, tracking enemies across continents rather than just along the Florida coast. But tonight, he was still the watchful guardian of Cedar Key, the ghost who had taught the cartels to fear the quiet veteran at the fishing dock. Dawn was breaking over Cedar Key as Marcus made his final preparations. His fishing gear was packed, as always, but now it concealed much more than just surveillance equipment. Each piece had been carefully modified to house the tools of his trade, specialized weapons, communication devices, and tactical gear that would serve him in the missions to come. The morning crowd at Palmer's dock watched as he made his way to his usual spot one last time. They didn't know he was leaving, didn't understand that their quiet neighbor was about to embark on a mission that would take him far from these peaceful waters. To them, he was still just the veteran who had somehow made their town safer, though none knew exactly how. "Ghost Eye, perimeter check complete." Watchman's voice came through his earpiece. "Town's secure. No unusual activity in the past 24 hours. Looks like your reputation is holding strong." Marcus acknowledged with a slight nod as he cast his line into the calm waters. The sun was rising over the Gulf, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and gold. It was a sight he had grown to love during his time here, one of many reasons he was determined to return once his new mission was complete. Sarah Martinez approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the local diner. She handed one to Marcus, then settled beside him on the dock. "El Dentista's trial date is set," she reported quietly. "Federal prosecutors say his testimony alone will put away at least 30 high-ranking cartel members. Not bad for a few nights' work. It wasn't about the numbers, Marcus replied, taking a sip of coffee. It was about sending a message. Some places should be left in peace. And now? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. These new threats Harrison's talking about, they're not going to be as easy to intimidate as El Dentista. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but his eyes scanned the horizon with the sharp focus of a predator preparing for the hunt. They're more sophisticated, better hidden, but they all have the same weakness. They think their power makes them untouchable, just like El Dentista did. Colonel Harrison's car appeared at the end of the street, a subtle signal that it was time to move. The intelligence they had gathered was time-sensitive. Every hour they waited gave their targets more chance to disappear deeper into the shadows. "The town will be here when you get back," Sarah assured him, understanding his reluctance to leave. "Your message was received loud and clear. No one's going to risk moving in on Cedar Key, not after what happened to El Dentista." Marcus began packing up his gear, each movement deliberate and practiced. "Keep watching the water," he instructed, "especially the deep channels at night. Old habits die hard. Someone might think they can slip through while I'm gone." "We've got it covered," Sarah promised. "State police have increased patrols, and my deputies know what to look for now. Besides, your reputation's worth more than a dozen patrol boats." The story's already becoming legend in criminal circles, the ghost of Cedar Key who hunts cartel leaders. A small smile crossed Marcus's face as he shouldered his equipment. The legend would serve its purpose, keeping the peace in his absence. Fear was a powerful deterrent, especially fear of an unseen hunter who could strike from any shadow, any distance. "Watchman, status report," he commanded softly. "All systems go, Ghost Eye. Transport arranged, intelligence updated, and backup channels confirmed. Just like old times. You hunt, I watch. They won't know what hit them." Marcus took one last look at the peaceful scene before him. The fishing boats heading out for their morning runs, the pelicans diving for breakfast, the old-timers gathering at the cafe for their daily coffee and gossip. This was what he had protected, what he would always protect, even if that meant taking the fight to distant shores. "Remember," he told Sarah as he prepared to leave, "if anything happens, we call the number," she finished. "But nothing's going to happen. Your lessons tend to stick." El Dentista made sure everyone understood what happens when they underestimate the quiet veteran at the fishing dock. Marcus walked toward Harrison's waiting car, his steps unhurried but purposeful. He had come to Cedar Key looking for peace, for a quiet place to retire from a life of combat. Instead, he had found a home worth defending, a community worth protecting, and a new purpose that combined his lethal skills with his desire to preserve peace. As the car pulled away from Palmer's dock, Marcus allowed himself one final glance in the rearview mirror. The rising sun had turned the water to gold, a perfect Florida morning unmarred by the shadows of violence that had recently threatened it. He had driven those shadows away once, and now he would hunt them to their source, ensuring they could never return. The quiet veteran who had taught the cartels to fear the fishing dock was going hunting again. And somewhere in the dark corners of the world, in hidden places where criminals thought themselves safe, a new whispered warning was already spreading. Beware the ghost who walks in daylight, the shadow that hunts other shadows. Beware the sniper they call Ghost Eye. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.